The backyard the police ignored until the smell returned. It started on a Sunday afternoon in the small town of Claremont, Pennsylvania, population just under 5,000. A quiet street, white fences, trimmed hedges, and the same families who'd lived there for generations. But that weekend, something foul began seeping through the neighborhood, a stench so strong that people couldn't open their windows. At first, everyone blamed the summer heat, then the trash collectors. But by Monday morning, the calls started pouring in to the local police department. On the corner of Alder and Spring, behind a pale blue bungalow, the smell was worse. It came from the backyard of the Miller family, an ordinary couple with 2 kids and a golden retriever. They just moved back into the home 6 months ago after inheriting it from Helen Miller, Samuel's late mother, who'd passed peacefully 2 years earlier. At least, that's what everyone thought. When Officer Daniel Rowe arrived at the scene, he found Mrs. Miller standing in her yard with a handkerchief pressed over her face. The air was heavy, sour, and unmistakably organic. "It's coming from the garden," she said, pointing toward a row of azaleas near the old tool shed. "We thought maybe an animal died under there." Rowe stepped closer and gagged. Whatever it wasn't just an animal. Behind him, a neighbor, Mrs. Wilkins, watched from across the fence. "You know what's funny?" she called out. "That's exactly where they dug up the yard 10 years ago, when that girl went missing." Rowe froze. "What girl?" Mrs. Wilkins lowered her voice. "Her name was Laura Trent. High school senior. Babysat for the Millers. They never proved anything, but police tore this place apart looking for her." Rowe radioed it in. Within hours, the Claremont Police Department's forensic unit had descended on the property. Bright yellow tape went up around the yard, and the neighbors gathered on their porches, whispering. The last time they'd seen this kind of commotion was in 2012, the year Laura disappeared. According to the old records, Laura had been last seen walking home after a babysitting shift for Helen Miller, the original homeowner. Detectives searched every inch of the property back then, even dug part of the garden after cadaver dogs picked up a scent. But nothing was found, and eventually the case went cold. Now, 10 years later, those same dogs were brought back. Different handlers, different team, but the same chilling result. The moment the dogs entered the Miller backyard, they went straight for the azalea patch. Tails stiff, ears low, bodies rigid. They started pawing at the dirt, whining, refusing to leave the spot. It was like déjà vu for some of the older officers. "We've been here before," one muttered. "Last time, we stopped at 6 feet. This time, they dug deeper." The soil was compact, layered with years of roots and gravel. But about 4 feet down, the shovel hit something hard. The forensics team switched to hand tools, carefully brushing away dirt. Soon, the outline of something rectangular began to appear. A metal container, rusted, about the size of a small trunk. It was sealed tight with industrial tape. Detective Hannah Cole, lead investigator on the new task force, knelt beside it. Her gloves brushed over the corroded surface. "Get me a camera," she said quietly. "We're not opening this here." The container was loaded into an evidence van and taken straight to the Claremont Forensic Lab. That night, Hannah stayed behind to file the report. She pulled the old case file from 2012, spreading its faded photographs across the table. One image caught her eye, a picture of Helen Miller, the homeowner at the time, smiling with her grandson on that very same patch of grass. But in the background of the photo, something small but unsettling stood out, a mound of freshly turned soil, just visible behind the garden fence. The next morning, as technicians prepared to open the sealed container, local news crews surrounded the property. Rumors spread fast, that a body had been found, that it was the missing girl, that the new owners were suspects. But no one, not even the Millers, was ready for what was actually inside. When the lab finally broke the seal, a cloud of air hissed out. The smell hit them first, but what lay beneath wasn't human remains. It was a stack of documents, hundreds of them, wrapped in plastic and bound with ribbon. Old photos, personal letters, medical records, even police reports. All of it belonged to Helen Miller, the deceased homeowner. Hannah sifted through the papers carefully, frowning at the strange mix of files. Some were labeled confidential, County Health Dept. Others were stamped with red ink, property of Claremont Police, do not release. It was as if someone had hidden a secret archive, a record of something big, something deliberately erased. And at the bottom of the box, she found one photograph that stopped her cold. It showed Helen Miller standing beside an unfamiliar man in uniform, a Claremont police sergeant from the 2012 investigation. Both were smiling, their hands covered in dirt, standing right in front of the half-dug garden. Hannah flipped the photo over. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were 4 words. "We found her here." Her pulse quickened. "Who wrote this?" she whispered. Roe looked at her, confused. "I thought Helen Miller died before we reopened the case." "She did," Hannah said quietly. 2 years ago. But someone, either before her death or after it, wanted this secret buried. And the evidence was pointing not just to the Millers, but to someone who had worn the badge. That night, as the last officers left the property, the smell began to return. Faint, but unmistakable. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the garden. It was coming from the old tool shed, 20 feet away. The morning after the discovery, Alder Street was a circus. Reporters swarmed the front lawn, neighbors watched from behind curtains, and the Miller kids were taken to stay with relatives. What had once been the quietest house on the block was now surrounded by yellow tape and questions no one could answer. Detective Hannah Cole stood at the edge of the property, sipping cold coffee, her eyes locked on the old shed. The wood was weathered, warped from years of rain, paint peeling like dry skin. Even from 20 feet away, she could smell it again, that same sour, earthy stench that had brought them here in the first place. "Dogs hit again?" she asked Officer Rowe as he approached. He nodded grimly. "Same pattern. Both handlers say their canines froze at the door. Wouldn't move an inch." Hannah exhaled. "Let's open it." Rowe pulled on gloves and yanked the padlock loose with a crowbar. The metal door groaned open, releasing a gust of air that made both of them stagger back. Inside, dust swirled in the morning light. Rows of rusted tools lined the walls. Rakes, shovels, saws, all coated in a thin gray film. But near the back corner, something looked wrong. The wooden floorboards were newer, cleaner. Replaced recently. "Get me a pry bar," Hannah said. Within minutes, the boards were up. Beneath them, packed tight in black plastic, was a bundle the size of a small child. The smell was suffocating. Forensics arrived within the hour. The bundle was removed carefully and sent to the state crime lab. Hannah stayed behind, pacing the yard, her thoughts racing. This wasn't random. Someone had buried documents under the garden, and something else under the shed. She opened her notebook, flipping through the copied reports from the 2012 investigation. The lead detective on the missing girl case was Sergeant Alan Burrows, the same man smiling in that photo with Helen Miller. According to the file, Burrows had led the original search, cleared the Millers after 2 weeks, and closed the case due to insufficient evidence. He retired the following year and left town. Hannah looked toward the shed, her stomach twisting. Insufficient evidence, huh? Later that afternoon, she met with the medical examiner. The autopsy results had come in faster than expected. The remains found under the shed weren't recent. They were at least 10 years old. Same time Laura Trent disappeared, the examiner confirmed. But there's more. Dental reconstruction matches partial records from her family dentist. It's her, detective. It's Laura. Hannah closed her eyes. She was here the whole time. The next day, the small-town police department went into damage control. Statements were rewritten, reports redacted. The chief ordered silence. But Hannah wasn't about to let this case disappear again. She went straight to archives, digging through old evidence logs. Half the original case files were missing, signed out under Burrows' name in 2013, never returned. That night, she drove 3 hours to where Burrows now lived, a retirement cottage on the edge of a lake outside Harrisburg. His porch light flickered weakly as she approached. When he opened the door, he looked smaller than his photos. Thinner, but his eyes were still sharp. "Detective Cole," he said before she could even speak. "I heard they found her." Hannah narrowed her gaze. "You seem awfully calm for someone whose case just came back to life." Burrows smiled faintly. It never died. It was buried. She stepped closer. By who? He motioned to the porch swing and Saturday. You ever work a case where the truth wasn't worth the damage it would cause? Where doing the right thing would break the wrong people? Answer the question. Burroughs sighed. Helen Miller was protecting someone. Her son. He and that girl, they were close. Too close for her comfort. One night, the girl came here crying. Helen called me to handle it. Said she found them fighting behind the shed. By the time I arrived, Laura was gone. Helen swore she'd run off. I believed her. I shouldn't have. Hannah felt her pulse rising. You cleared the case. You wrote her off as a runaway. I didn't just write it off, Burroughs said quietly. I was told to. The chief wanted it gone. The Millers were local royalty, owned half the town's property. When the dogs hit the first time, we dug shallow. The chief said stop. We stopped. He looked up at her, eyes glinting. But I knew she was there. I left the note in that photo. I left the evidence. I thought someone like you might find it someday. Hannah stared at him in disbelief. So you let them live with a body under their shed for 10 years? Burroughs nodded slowly. Sometimes justice has to wait. Hannah stood, disgusted. You buried more than a girl, Sergeant. You buried this town. When she left the porch, the wind carried the faint smell of damp earth. She didn't notice the flicker in Burroughs' window as she drove off, or the figure watching her from the tree line. The following morning, before she could file her report, Burroughs was found dead in his cabin, gunshot wound to the head. No note. No sign of struggle. Officially ruled a suicide. But Hannah wasn't convinced. That evening, she returned to the Miller property one last time. The forensics team had cleared the site, the tape was gone, and the backyard looked eerily normal again. Except for the shed, it stood there like a ghost. She walked inside, shining her flashlight across the walls. Something caught her eye, a faint inscription carved into one of the wooden beams, hidden behind the tool rack. She leaned in, squinting under the dust. She never left. Her heart thudded in her chest. Beneath the carving embedded deep in the wood was a small metallic object. She pried it out carefully. It was a necklace, a locket with an engraving, LT. Laura Trent. She flipped it open. Inside was a photograph of Laura as a teenager, and next to her, a boy about her age. Samuel Miller, the current homeowner. Hannah stared at the faces, the familiar smile, the matching backyard behind them. The date on the photo read September 4, 2012, the night Laura went missing. Her phone buzzed suddenly, a text from an unknown number. Stop digging. She's not the only one buried. The number traced back to a disposable prepaid line. She stepped out of the shed, heart pounding, scanning the quiet neighborhood. A single porch light flickered across the street. The same house where Mrs. Wilkins, the neighbor, had watched them from the start. Hannah froze as the light went out. Claremont was quiet again. Too quiet. After a week of chaos, the town returned to its routine of denial. The headlines faded, the tape came down, and everyone agreed not to talk about the Millers anymore. But Detective Hannah Cole couldn't stop thinking about that message. Stop digging. She's not the only one buried. The number was untraceable, but the implication was clear. Someone was still watching. Someone who knew she wasn't done. That night, she sat alone in her car outside the Miller home. The windows of the house were dark. A faint wind rattled the empty swing in the backyard. Her flashlight rested on the passenger seat, next to the photo she'd found in the locket, Laura and Samuel Miller smiling in the same yard where she'd been buried. Rose's voice came through her earpiece. You're still at the scene, aren't you? Yeah, she said. Something doesn't add up. If Helen Miller killed Laura, why hide her in the shed and not move her? Why bury documents in the garden years later? It's almost like someone wanted this found. Rose hesitated. Or wanted it found now. Before Hannah could respond, her flashlight flickered. The air outside seemed heavier, the night thicker. She stepped out of the car, her boots crunching over gravel. The smell, faint, almost forgotten, drifted again through the air. It wasn't from the shed this time. It came from the house. She approached the back door, half expecting someone to be there. The handle was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale, the faint buzz of a refrigerator the only sound. The living room was untouched since the investigation. Half-packed boxes, dusty furniture, family photos left behind. But something on the wall caught her eye, a new picture frame. It showed the Miller family standing together, Samuel, his wife, the kids, smiling. But in the reflection of the window behind them, there was another figure. An older woman, half hidden in the background. Helen Miller. Except the photo was dated April 2023. Helen had died in 2021. Her stomach tightened. "Ro," she whispered into the mic, "you said Helen's death certificate? Filed and verified. I saw the paperwork myself. Who identified the body?" He hesitated. "Samuel Miller." Hannah turned toward the hallway. "Then we've got a problem." The upstairs floor creaked as she moved closer to the master bedroom. The smell grew stronger. Inside, a single light bulb swung overhead, flickering. The room was stripped bare, except for a large trunk at the foot of the bed, the same kind they'd found buried in the garden. Her gloved hands unclasped the latches. Inside were papers, identical to the ones from the first container. Financial records, old police logs, sealed letters. She flipped through one envelope marked, "To Samuel from Mom." The handwriting matched the one on the photo. "We found her here." She unfolded the note inside. "They'll never believe what you did. So I took the blame. The rest is for you to finish." There was a key taped to the bottom of the page, small, brass, and marked with a faded engraving, A5 Wilkins. The neighbor. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the same number. "If you open her basement, you'll wish you hadn't." Hannah bolted from the house. Within minutes, she was crossing the street to the Wilkins home, her flashlight slicing through the fog. The front door was unlocked, just like the Millers. The smell hit her the moment she stepped inside, sharp and chemical, mixed with something old and rotten. If you think this story was dark, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe before the next backyard tells its story.